Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is, wherever you are. Welcome to today's Ag Markets Blast with myself and the awesome goddess of grain herself. Well, as usual, we will give you a well, I won't. The awesome Angie will give you a rapid roundup of the latest pricing flows and market moving news in agricultural markets. And speak of the devil, and she really is a devil. 1 second, let me invite you to be a co-host. Send co-host invite. Morning, Tom, or afternoon, even Tom. I've still not forgiven Tom for dropping me out yesterday. He was meant to meet me for a beer, and he bailed on me. Anyway, enough about me and my drinking habits. Angie, how are you? Happy Friday.
Happy Friday to you. I'll meet you for a beer in a few hours, like mentally, on the mental plane or whatever,
Perfect. Well,
in
do you know
our
what? I
imagination.
I do.
A VR
There are
beer.
increasingly calls for PIQ to do a tour of the US to meet some of the people that we interact with quite a lot. So yeah, you are top of the bill in terms of
That's
the roadmap for me. But
well, I
anyway.
will show you America's high five when you get
But
here.
I
So
can't wait. I
that's
can't
what we
wait.
got. So happy Friday. Super pumped to be here.
Let me
Excited. I get to Oh
let me
yeah,
just quickly
legals.
do the legals because
I will shut
it'll
up.
be the one time that I don't do them and we'll get into trouble. Uh,
Yeah.
Nothing discussed in this space session constitutes trading or investment advice or infers any kind of endorsement by PIQ, trading as PIQ Global Limited, PIQ or PIQ Suite, or indeed the affiliates and the hosts, which, as you know by now, is hang on 1 sec. Someone is filling up a water bottle in my kitchen and it's very loud. Sorry about that. Also including the host and the affiliates, which, as you know by now, is the awesome Angie and myself, Ryan.
Ew.
Yeah,
So
apologies for the
yeah,
background noise.
That's what I am. Like I said, pumped to be here. So, a few different things. Our three bullet points, right? And just kind of lining them up with what I talked about this morning in commentary. And the biggest thing, biggest focus is going to continue to be what the heck is happening in South America. And so,
Following
um,
on nicely from Wednesday, then.
exactly, yeah. Like you're not going to miss a beat in this. This is going to be our focus now for the next 6 to 8, 10 weeks. You're going to hear me probably talk about South America, grain movement, all of that other stuff. Basically almost daily, just because it's going to have such a massive influence on our day-to-day trade and the direction and trader sentiment and this, that, and the other thing. And so we are looking at the possibility here. Or the potential, or actually, it's in the forecast. I think it's pretty solidly expected that the drier portions of southern Brazil, northern Argentina, Paraguay, these other areas that have been exceptionally dry and super, super hot, here they're going to see some continued heat for another couple days or so, and then they're going to see a bit of a back off of the heat and more in the way of rain coming in. Over the next couple of weeks, it looks like their outlook will improve, which should really help, your full season corn in the south and some of these other things. But having said that, we're kind of looking at a meat and a sandwich of problems, simply because we still have these issues in the central and northern portions of Brazil where heavier rain is causing issues. One of the things that AgriInvest pointed out this morning, and I will always say they are worth every penny to give you a feel for what actually is happening in the cash market when it comes to farmer sentiment and trade out of Brazil. One of the things that they pointed out this morning that I had not realized is that a lot of farmers had worked to desiccate their fields. And so, to desiccate a field, basically you go in and you spray it down early to shut it down. You drop the leaves, you stop the production process, and you get in and you harvest that crop. And we don't really see that a ton in the U.S. Especially, but you have heard about it in other places. I'm not going to say like every field in Brazil obviously has been done to, but it does appear as though it's been enough to where it is causing some issues simply because the heavy rain has kicked in. Traditionally you would desiccate a field and be able to get in and harvest it once it was ready. But the heavy rain that they're seeing, several inches of rain per day in some instances, is keeping these fields, really, really wet. Like you're looking at moisture levels of around 13%, and typically in Brazil, they do harvest beans a bit wetter than what we do here in the US. In the US, target harvest would be around 15% or so for soybeans. In Brazil, they're trying around 20%. Of course, it's a rainforest or exceptionally moist down there.
The hints
So
in the
they do,
name.
yeah, so they do have, some issues with moisture and things like that. But, one of the things that tends to happen with soybeans is that once they're ready to go, if they get too much rain on them, they'll basically resprout, or they'll basically, the pods will reopen. Like you just won't be able to necessarily use them. And again, This isn't something that I'm talking about like, "Oh my gosh, we're not going to have a crop out of Brazil because it's all rotted in the field," but it is something to watch because all of these little things kind of add together, by death by a thousand paper cuts or what
Right.
have you,
Yes. Yeah.
where you see some trims. And the other thing that it is starting to impact as well is grain flow, because there was an expectation that we'd have a reasonable amount of harvest, beans ready to be harvested here in the month of January. And so you are seeing port stocks fall significantly in the northern parts of Brazil. Southern Brazil, the improvement in their forecast and some of that should help to pick it up to where you aren't going to see a loss in business necessarily. But this is all stuff that we're going to be watching because not only do you have the economic factors at hand, in Brazil when it comes to what are we doing with currency, what are we going to see happen with inflation, how are we going to make these selling decisions as we move ahead. Now you're looking at probably beans that are already exceptionally cheap. You're going to
Right.
be cheaper, and probably going to see a shrink or a fall in yield potentially, depending. And so, yeah, it's going to be something to watch. And that's not even mentioning, and I'll shut up for a second after that,
Yeah.
the dryness and the heat in southern Argentina looks to kind of continue. And so we could see a bit of a trim there further on, especially with the corn crop, because that's further along into the production process. But something we've got to watch as well is just this idea has been that the South American weather is perfect, and I'd said that to our friend Nick a while back. I'm like, "Well, the ship has sailed basically on South American weather," and he's like, "Slow your roll there, dollar
Well, do you
face,"
know what? We couldn't have planned this any better because I'd already put up Nick's most recent post about the rains in South America, which is great. Also, big shout out to him. Awesome guy. Also, awesome product that he's done in terms of what they've built with in terms of the weather and stuff monitoring in South America. So definitely check him out. You can see him listening in Nico with the. I promise you, that's not his real photo. That's definitely he's far more handsome in real life than his avatar.
Exactly what he
Um,
looks like, right? The avatar, but it is definitely, and it's worth the while to check it out because it's nice to have weather that doesn't really have the human opinion. Because right now,
yes.
I would say one of the things that we tend to run into a lot of times, and especially in markets that are, possibly in a transitional period or possibly kind of bucking what people were expecting. You know what I mean? Because we get this idea in our minds, like look at corn, like we still have people that will argue about corn being bearish overall, completely ignoring the world stocks levels
Right.
are
Yeah.
at some of the lowest in over a decade. Just because they'd had that narrative beat into them for so long that they can't, it's a hard struggle to change.
Yeah.
And so that'll be one of the things we have to watch with South America is this idea was we were going to see a 250 soybean crop, we were going to see this huge corn crop come in, they were going to just eat our lunch. They probably will still eat some of our lunch, but maybe not, they probably won't get the whole sandwich at least this time.
Yeah. Exactly that. Exactly
So
that.
so all right, point two, Trump on trade. I feel like every day the bullet points are just going to be the same for a while, so just get used to it. But I'll be able to share updates. It's not the same exact thing; it's just the same bullet points. And so I think yesterday, and maybe it doesn't need to be Trump on trade. Let's say, Scott Bessent's hearing, his confirmation hearing, or his at least his dance in front of the Senate Finance Committee, to me was super interesting for a couple different reasons yesterday. First things first, I think he kind of outlined because we've heard this, too hot, too cold trade sort of approach, right? We had the
Yeah.
we're only going to do 10 to 20% on critical imports, and then we had the we're going to executive order all of this and go it alone and emergency order or whatever, blah blah blah. And then Reuters yesterday was like, remember how shitty it was a few years back, like, just in case you forgot it. It was real bad, and so we kind of have had these things here that have just kind of been beat into us for a while. And so yesterday, in front of the Senate Finance Committee, Bessent kind of said that the tariffs would be used to address three different points or be used in three different ways. The first would be to address trade or what the administration views as quote unfair trade practices,
Yes.
right? The second would be to just generally raise revenue, I guess, like party, like that's too cheap. Let's put some money on that to put it in our pocket. And the third, which I found was interesting, and I appreciate that they finally have maybe put a word to it on what they're trying to do with it that doesn't feel as like, I don't know, aggressive or what have you, but they're talking about it as a replacement of sorts to economic sanctions. And so I was
Yeah.
kind of like, to me, maybe I'm a simple human, maybe too simple, where it was kind of like the light bulb went off in that sense, where I was like, yeah, that is what they're, you know what I mean? Like it is one of those things where it's like, okay, well, we are going to punish you, but it's just going to look a little different, or we call it by a different name.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Exactly.
you know, But the biggest thing that I thought that was super important that he had touched on, and this had been one of the things that I had recognized in his history when he was first brought up, was how much he thinks phase one needs to be reopened, or we need to go back to phase one. And
Yeah.
so he was very clear in yesterday's hearing that he expects China's government to live up to the phase one trade deal. And so, for those of you keeping score at home, there was a crap ton of US commodity purchases required in that
Oh,
deal.
of
Like,
course there
we're
was. Yes.
massive purchases. And even more interesting to me, and probably not less, probably very much less likely. Like, I could see it to where they could come in and be like, we already had an agreement on this. Like, we'll follow through with these things. We'll roll back Biden stuff, like blah, 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 like phase one, go forward. I think that's the outlier. Like, no one expects that to happen, but I think it's possible. But one of the things I thought was most interesting was Besant saying that he wants to add additional pressure for them to catch up on the purchases they hadn't
Yeah.
been making.
Well,
And
and do
so,
you know what? It just
yeah,
sorry, but
no, you're fine.
if I remember correctly, back then we were basically everyone was waiting almost daily. We were getting headlines out of China about how many they'd bought, how much they bought today, or
Yes.
what orders they were going to. So potentially, then we could be going back into that very much, far more headlines directly impacting the grains markets. Yeah, obviously
Yeah.
headlines are always important. Well, the right headlines are always important, but we could be going back into a period where there's more. Well, the frequency of very important headlines for
Hmm.
ag markets could be starting to like tick back up again.
Could be huge. Yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think, and the one thing I'd point out is like the initial analysis of phase one was that we were going to struggle to be able to meet the requirements on our end
Oh
as
yeah,
a
right.
supplier because the numbers were so lofty that they were having to target from a purchase standpoint. And so that'll be something that I think we really have to pay attention to, because so
Yeah,
many people, to them, the easy solution is he's going to destroy trade and everything's going to be disrupted and you know what I mean? And I feel
yeah,
like we've been pricing that in. To me, I always want to look at, where could this analysis be wrong? That's the question
yes,
I ask myself
exactly,
every
exactly
day.
that.
Like, is where could I be wrong in this, or where does it seem like it's such a lock? Where is the
Yeah,
hole?
yeah, yeah, exactly,
And
exactly
so,
that.
to me, that's what I'm looking at. And so, yeah, we're basically 10 minutes in. Export sales is the last bullet point I was going to touch on. Being back from the holiday helped. Corn export sales were above expectations. Wheat export, or at the higher end of expectations, depending on how you want to slice it, but they were above a million metric ton again. Wheat sales were above expectations. U.S. soft red wheat is some of the cheapest and highest quality wheat available in the world market right now. So that should be interesting. Soybean sales were reasonable or respectable for the second week of January. And so we'll continue to watch that. The biggest thing we're going to need to pay attention to now in corn isn't as much the sales pace, though I would like to see a continuation of decent sales pace. It's going to be the shipping pace. And so
Right.
this past week was a marking year high for shipments. It does look like we'll see a continuation of strong shipping. It's definitely something we do need to see, and something we'll be watching as we move ahead. And that's it. That's the last point. I mean, we made it through
Awesome.
the week almost. It looks like we'll try to trade higher on the open here in beans. Corn's up in the old crop. Wheat doesn't care. And yeah, we're closed Monday until Monday night, and I'm ready to see what next week brings. It could be pretty explosive Monday night if we see a shift in weather pattern.
Yeah.
Because we really don't have an agreement yet between the Euro and the GFS as to what to totally expect in South America next week and beyond.
Awesome. Well, as usual, you've been amazing and thank you for all the insights. Just a couple of quick shout outs. Angie has put together an awesome Twitter list because obviously, Twitter can get very, very noisy and messy. It's very much noise rather than signal at times. So, Angie's put together an awesome ags focused Twitter list, which we're also going to put on the PIQ platform so you can have it live streaming on there with no ads and all that. We bypass all of that on via Twitter. Don't ask me how, I have no idea. So also that leads into another thing, which we're this year or this quarter we're starting to really look to things we can add to our PIQ platform. Which you haven't looked at it, check it out. Obviously, links via my profile and stuff. And we realize that there's so much really high quality information out there. Nico's quality content being definitely one of them that we want to start adding to our platform to make it much more accessible to you guys that are actually using it. To make your informed decisions about when and why and where you're going to be selling your grains and whatnot. So hopefully between us all, we can make a really powerful tool that that helps you guys out for very little, if no money. But that's a little personal shout out
Farmer,
there to PIQ. But yeah,
it's awesome, and the nice thing about that is farmers do love free stuff. That's
well,
always been a
exactly that.
joke.
Don't we all?
Farmers love
Don't
free
we all?
stuff.
Exactly. Well,
So
look,
no,
Angie,
it's
thank you
great.
so much. Have a lovely weekend, listeners, especially our loyal listeners that come in and tune in every day. Have a marvelous weekend. Look after yourselves, and I guess we'll see you Tuesday.
Yes, we'll see you Tuesday.
See you next Tuesday.
Have a good one.
See